masterful destruction of another Russian tank. Did you notice the anti-mine trawl lying on the road nearby? Apparently, the tank ran over the mines, exploded, disconnected the damaged trawl, but it was no longer able to leave. One more grenade, and the Russian tank is finished. There is another target nearby. A Russian tank with a brazier above the turret. In this case, the grid prevented the drone from throwing a grenade inside the tank. This video was signed as follows. Finished. The Ukrainian operator made 5 drops, and only the last ammunition hit the open hatch. The result is excellent. The Russian junk is destroyed. Or a javelin missile that attacks a tank at its most vulnerable part. Now, let's look at some examples. The drone dives into the most vulnerable location. Fragments penetrate the external tanks and ignite the fuel. Naturally, such a fire can no longer be put out. Gradually, the fire gets to the mechanism with the shells, and the tank explodes. The situation is the same with the Russian army's AFVs, only their armor is even thinner, and they are much easier to hit. Look here. 3 Russian tanks storm a village. One of them stays on the main street and starts backing up. A mine stops the movement. Precision artillery is fired at the immobilized tank. A shell explodes nearby, and shrapnel pierces the side of the tank. The shells located in the automatic loading mechanism catch fire. Now, often, the Russians use AFVs to bring ammunition to their positions. If a drone strikes such a vehicle, it causes a massive explosion. The sides of Russian tanks have thin armor. The ATGM easily overcomes it and hits the ammunition. The result is the detonation of the tank. This is why storing shells, for example, as in Abrams tanks, is safer for the crew. The pressure from ignition will be vented through a special chamber, rather than frying the tankers. Another problem with Russian tanks is the fuel storage system. Some of the fuel is located on the tank, 500 liters in these tanks, 400 liters in these tanks, and 700 inside the tank. This video features a rare and dangerous machine. This is a Soviet engineering remote mining machine. The video shows the machine being struck by 3 FPV drones all at once. The Ukrainians launch an FPV drone. The drone dives precisely into the engine compartment. Almost always, this causes the tank to catch on fire. This case was no exception. The tank is engulfed in flames. The cost of such a drone is about $350 to $500, and the cost of the destroyed tank? About $2 million. Another video of Ukrainians hunting. A truck drives along the road and pulls a howitzer behind it. The drone accurately hits the Russian tractor. The Russians unhook the howitzer, turn around, and drive away. But that doesn't help them. A second Ukrainian kamikaze drone catches up with the Russian vehicle. Did you think the Ukrainians would stop there? They send a third drone and destroy the Russian howitzer. Mission accomplished. HIMARS strikes are hard to confuse with anything else. In this video, the Ukrainians demonstrate how just 2 shells hit 2 Russian Masta-S self-propelled artillery units. It's a thing of beauty. A Ukrainian FPV drone approaches a Russian BMP-2. A hit to the front of the armored personnel carrier results in a powerful detonation. This happens quite rarely. The Russian junk is destroyed. The Russians tried to cross the minefield and failed. The tank is stopped. The crew escapes. One of the Russian columns came under this kind of fire. We had to process this video in order to not shock you with this footage. Railroad service was completely stopped, and the bridge was destroyed. And if these soldiers are in the field, there is nothing stopping the Ukrainians from using ammunition with tungsten balls. Such shrapnel pierces metal. Can you imagine what it does to Russian soldiers? One question does remain. When will the US transfer ATACMS missiles to Ukraine? Such a move by the Pentagon would complicate the situation for Russia. The Ukrainians would be able to destroy logistics in Crimea and deoccupy the south. To do this, we need to cut off supplies to Crimea via the Kerch Bridge, and further destroy the bridge at Chonhar. This is a question to which I do not have an answer. This is what a serious command center in the town of Izium looks like after the HIMARS strike. The Russian military was shocked by the firepower of the system. Here's another example. A recent strike on the Russians in the Kherson region. 5 units with infantry. One HIMARS system fires 5 missiles at programmed targets. All 5 missiles hit exactly in the designated places and hit the Russian army personnel. The Russians hid their howitzer in a forest belt. That's no obstacle for HIMARS. The howitzer and the crew destroyed. What were the Russians counting on by moving their equipment into the open? The Ukrainians followed them, waited for the Russians to stop, and aimed missiles at them. This SPH was stuffed with ammunition and exploded violently when hit by a rocket. Check out this video. Now watch this fragment. The projectile impact has a distinctive explosion. It's the work of the HIMARS. It's unmistakable. That's how his ammunition explodes. Here's a few more examples. This is what it looked like in practice. This is a video of a hit on a Russian military convoy, and there are dozens of such examples. And this is how it looks like at night. Naturally, it is impossible to shoot down such a shell or hide from it. For HIMARS, this target is no problem. One missile, and the Russian complex could not avoid being fried. So they use a kamikaze drone. It penetrates the armor and gets to the ammunition. Nice explosion! Oh-ho! What do we have here? The Strela 10 is an important and rare system. The kamikaze drone easily takes out the Russian hardware. Russians died trying to attack. It looked really stupid. Check this out. Nearby, there's another system. You can see shrapnel exploding next to the MLRS. One of them hits the system with a loaded package of missiles, and there is a powerful explosion. Check out this crater. It's brutal. Remember when I said this wasn't the last tulip destroyed in this video? An FPV drone delivers a package straight to a Russian heavy mortar. A beautiful geyser of sparks and fire warms up the frustrated Russian boys. Another abandoned Russian tank. A thermobaric grenade flies exactly into the hole. The shells ignite and destroy the tank. The turret is thrown back dozens of meters. The pieces of the tank are scattered all around. And in the place of the tank, a smoldering crater. Let's take a look at this. The Russians are constantly changing positions. The Ukrainians have to watch and wait. Finally, they manage to catch the entire air defense battery and hit the launchers, the radar station, and the command center all at the same time. A shell exploded near this SPH. First, there was smoke, and then a huge boom. An FPV drone dives into the turret of a Russian tank, penetrates the armor, and causes the shells to ignite. Great job! The terrorists have one less tank, and the Ukrainian victory is getting closer. Ukrainians found 2 trucks and a warehouse of terrorists' ammunition. 2 kamikaze drones work in pairs. The first destroys the first target, followed by the second truck. The fire detonates the stacked ammunition. Nice. 3 more lucky men. The Ukrainians destroy a D-30 howitzer with an accurate hit. Detect and hit 2 more Gvozdika SPHs. We see the characteristic explosions of HIMARS shells. What have we got here? 2 Akatsiya SPHs. Well, guys, if you're caught in the lenses of Ukrainian reconnaissance drones, you don't have long to live. The Ukrainians hit the first target first, followed by the second. Excuse me, but parking here is forbidden. A Ukrainian kamikaze drone strikes halted Russian terrorists' AFVs. The second target turned out to be a rare Tunguska anti-aircraft missile cannon system. Well done. This is what the mindless Russian attacks led to. And this tank was on its way to shell Ukrainian positions, but it failed. Good Ukrainian soldiers prevented it. Here's a video from the phone of a Russian tanker. And this is the work of Ukrainian drones on Russian armored vehicles. Video of another Russian failure. One BMP stands in a forest belt and fires at AFU positions. The Ukrainians fire from an ATGM. A precise hit on the armored vehicle puts it out of action. There is a powerful explosion. The armored vehicle is torn in half. The second APC, realizing that the case will end badly, drives away. But not far away. Ukrainian artillery strikes several precise strikes. One of them accurately hits the armored vehicle and destroys it. And in this video, you'll see yet another example of the Russian military being idiotic. And from this video, you can assess the level of the Russian army. This is not a junkyard. This is not an abandoned position. This is a Russian army ammunition depot. Just one nearby hit destroys another depot. The Ukrainians also destroyed other equipment and ammunition depots. The Ukrainian takes a javelin, points it at a Russian tank, and fires a missile. This is what it looks like from the drone. Another angle. And this Russian tank was stopped by Ukrainian artillery. The drone drops 3 grenades, and the last one hits the open hatch. The fire destroys the tank.
The missile flying in from above penetrates the thin armor. The ammunition is often detonated. The javelin missile penetrates up to 600 millimeters of armor. One shot can turn a Russian tank into a pile of scattered scrap metal. After a missile hit, a Russian tank often looks like this. One of the best operations using javelin in Ukraine. Ukrainians notice a Russian convoy. Soldiers prepare javelin launchers and wait for the Russians. The first missile is launched. As we can expect, it's a direct hit. The Russians have already received a signal that they do not need to go further, but this does not stop them. The second shot in another explosion. What are the Russians thinking about? They have already lost 2 tanks. The third rocket is fired. Again, the Russian armor fails to cope with the javelin. The Russian tank decides its forehead can stop the missile. Let's take a look. The missile hits exactly on target, the armor withstands. The tank retreats. There's an explosion nearby. This is all that remains of the Russian tanks. Somehow the Russians shouted that it was impossible, and it was not true. The distance to the tank was 2,300 meters. The Ukrainians destroyed it, you just saw the proof. You can often see Ukraine using a handheld anti-tank grenade launcher, or RPG, that stands for rocket-propelled grenade. It is difficult to classify it as a full-fledged ATGM, but it can surely immobilize heavy equipment. Immediately a rocket hits the left side. Next, the Ukrainians fire the second missile. The artillery strikes. This is because the Russians, like the Ukrainians, fly at extremely low altitudes, and the speed of the helicopter is not high enough to evade the javelin missile. For example, this is how the javelin missile is able to catch up with Russian helicopters. The second shot pierces the armor and reaches the ammo. All 3 tanks were destroyed. This is how the Russian armored vehicle was stopped and then finished off. Probably the red dot is the Stugna rocket fired at the Russian APC. You can see the results. Another sabotage group of Ukrainians gets very close to a Russian tank. The javelin missile is launched. It flies upwards and then dives down sharply. The tank is destroyed. The job is done. In general, Stugna missile launcher deserves a separate video. If you are interested in this topic, let me know about it in comments and I will make a video for you.
The terrorists start to panic and make another mistake. The tank is hit. I can't say that these tankers made the right choice, but they tried. The javelin missile hits the tank, but it stays on the move and retreats into the wooded area. A powerful explosion sends the Russian tank's turret tens of meters into the sky. Nice ambush, Ukrainians. A Russian tank is in the sights of the cornet. When the missile reaches the target, there is a flash, the tank is hit. Or this abandoned Russian armored personnel carrier after a failed assault. A missile attacks it right in the forehead. And we could talk about the massacre organized by the Ukrainians near Marinka all day long. Russian equipment was scattered everywhere, and all of this is the merit of the Ukrainians armed with the javelin. And this is how the Ukrainians, using javelins and cornets at the same time, in this case, the Russians thought they had their tanks safely hidden. The javelin missile is capable of attacking targets behind obstacles. The most important thing is to aim the missile and choose the right mode of operation. The Russian tank will be doomed. A Ukrainian man aimed and launched a Javelin missile. The complex is capable of hitting targets at a distance of up to 4,750 meters. The flash and black smoke is a hit on the helicopter. And this trap became shock therapy for the Russians. An armored group of 8 vehicles moved in for the assault. Ukrainians aim at the first target, which is a tank. The crew does not suspect that in a moment, it will vaporize. One more shot, the target is destroyed. Copter starts at $15 million, and the cost of a Javelin missile is $150,000. This Russian helicopter was flying in tandem with another one. The missile hits the tail of the helicopter and disables it. It's moments away from crashing to the ground. The Russians never realized that they didn't need to go any further and send another armored personnel carrier. Stugna is already reloaded and ready for use. There is a hit. The assault has failed. Another big target. The Tornado MLRS is a very rare and expensive system. The HIMARS receive location data and fire missiles at the target. One shot, and the target is destroyed. Ukrainians stop a Russian tank with the help of NLAW. When the smoke cleared, the Ukrainians aim the Javelin ATGM. Boom! The tank is destroyed. Russian camouflage didn't work in this situation either. The Ukrainians detected a Russian SUV and launched an FPV drone. The vehicle was destroyed. That's how the Ukrainians pumped this Russian car too. A Russian Gvozdika fired at Ukrainian positions, but it didn't last long. A precise hit, and the enemy SPH is engulfed in flames. Now no one will shoot with this piece of junk. An excellent demonstration of counter-battery warfare. A nice headshot on another tank. The drone dived head-on. Even if the tank wasn't destroyed, the optics, guidance system, and defenses were definitely damaged. HIMARS fire a GMLRS missile and hits the system. A powerful detonation. The machine destroyed. This Russian Ivan made the right choice. Seeing the Ukrainian drone, he decided to surrender to the captivity. The operator immediately realized what the occupant wanted and showed humanity. The drone shows Ivan where to run to save his life. The drone leads Ivan to one of the positions where the Ukrainian military is already waiting for him. This Ivan will live and return home. He has a second chance. Not everyone is as lucky as he was. The Russians thought these structures would protect them from kamikaze drones? Well, they were wrong. A precise hit takes out an armored personnel carrier. And that's all in the last week. Well done, Ukrainians. As you have realized, HIMARS is actively used for counter-battery warfare. The first victim of the system in this video is the Gvozdika SPH. A characteristic explosion of HIMARS shell, and the ammunition launcher is destroyed. Aerial reconnaissance detects Grad MLRS, a perfect target. There's a hit. And this is the work of Ukrainian artillery in the Zaporizhia direction. Russian armored vehicles moved in to evacuate their soldiers, who are repelling the Ukrainian assault. They begin firing at the advancing Ukrainians. After the first artillery strike, the armored vehicles leave their positions, abandoning the soldiers. This Russian tank in Marinka was hit by Ukrainian artillery fire. A cloud of fire rises after being hit. The Russian junk continues to move. Another hit. Eventually, the tank was immobilized and destroyed. A precise throw and a grenade goes into the hatch of the armored personnel carrier. Now the paratroopers find themselves without a transport. The third drone crashes into the engine compartment of the tank, and the target is destroyed. There could have been difficulties in destroying the third target, but the skill of the drone operator helped to evade the complex missile and hit it. Another Russian tank. Being immobilized, it's an easy prey for the Ukrainian drone. A precise hit in the open gunner's hatch. Ukrainian artillery switches to the Russians in the forest belt. After several accurate hits, the Russians decide to flee. But running across the field to the nearest shelter is madness. The Russians decide to do that as well. A bad idea. Most of them couldn't make it. The remnants of the defeated Russian army gather in a populated area, But Ukrainian artillery destroys the transport in which they plan to evacuate. They set off again on foot. What happens to them next is revealed in the following videos. The Russians are shelling Ukrainian positions with a Tulpen heavy mortar. If you're lucky, a drone hit will cause the ammunition to ignite and cause a massive explosion. A destroyed Soint Sepyok is 15,000 times more expensive than a drone. These drones also allow you to hit the enemy in cover. Check out this video. The operator directs the drone exactly inside the enemy position. The Russian tank was immobilized. The decision is made to destroy it. The drone is directed to the most vulnerable part, where the tank's armor is the thinnest. Such a strike has this result. Subsequently, the tank will burn. Another firing point with a large caliber machine gun. The drone makes a smooth landing and hits the target. If the operator manages to direct the drone into a weakly protected part of the tank, the shaped explosive can hit the tank's ammunition and cause a powerful detonation. A similar situation. After an armored personnel carrier is hit, a fire breaks out. What's wrong with the Russians' firefighting systems? Why are so many vehicles just burning up? And surveillance, communications, electronic warfare, anti-tank and machine gun points? Drones are directly involved in the fight against them as well. You can just send an FPV drone with explosives. A Russian tank was ambushed, and a BMP came to the rescue. The Ukrainians were waiting for someone to come to the Russians' aid. A grenade penetrates the armor on the vehicle. The vehicle is damaged, and it stops. It's time to finish off the invaders' equipment. Take a look here. These are 2 cars and a truck that the Russian terrorists are using to move between their positions. The Ukrainian operator is pointing a drone at the most valuable one among them. But they do have a very good advantage for Ukraine. They explode very nicely and delight us with videos like this. Reinforcements arrive and evacuate some of the soldiers. What is that second tank counting on? Obviously, there may be more mines in this area. Do they really like that? Both tanks are engulfed in flames. Pillars of fire are shooting out of the open hatches. The angle changes. Look at these 2 destroyed Russian vehicles. A disgraceful defeat. And this is what the use of the Excalibur high-precision projectile looks like against the Russian T-72 tank. This was the location of a Russian warehouse. Ammunition, fuel, food, and so on were stored there. Ukraine destroyed all of the Russian supplies with precise artillery fire. Here's some unique footage of the destruction of a Russian tank. A drone hit causes a fire. Pillars of fire burst out of the hatches. Another escape of Russians from their positions as the AFU approached. The line of an abandoned terrorist armored personnel carrier. Nice work! Who's this here? Another lost Russian T-90. The first drone dives into the turret. Looks like we need another strike. The Ukrainians launch a second drone. The operator aims it at the tank's engine. Target destroyed. And this Russian tank is hiding in the bushes. A high-precision shell turns the tank into a mountain of scrap metal. The Russians are trying to gain a foothold on the second line of defense. Ukrainian drone operators are kindly preventing them from doing so. Grief-stricken builders, you'd better go home while your hands and feet are still in place. And this is a Russian ammunition depot after an encounter with an FPV drone. It's a thing of beauty. And this is a small parking lot not far from the front lines. The camouflage did not help the Russians in this situation either. A Ukrainian drone followed the Grad MLRS. When the Russian system stopped, the HIMARS struck. Hey Russians, how do you like the taste of American democracy? And Russian tanks? An incredible number of videos of their destruction are now appearing online. The Russians have stationed their AFVs in this small town. It's time to turn them into scrap metal. The first target is hit. It's now smoking. The second drone hits another AFV parked outside a neighboring building. Alright, let's move on. The third drone dives right into the first trough. Turns out there's another armored personnel carrier hidden nearby. The fourth drone hits it too. All 3 targets have been destroyed. There are Russian military personnel traveling in this car. These are not ordinary soldiers, but officers. In a moment, a Ukrainian drone is conducting an outreach. Our best wishes to the recently departed. The second drone is released to take out the electronics. This is what the second strike looked like from outside.
Бада-бум! Зараз буде видно, як з нього залишки кишок полетіли. Все. Тепер це труп. Пустий, як бубен, як порося. Джага-джага!
The Ukrainians send another drone to leave no chance for the complex. Mission accomplished. I rarely show Russians getting kicked in the teeth and running away, apparently for nothing. This video is one of many examples. We see several pieces of heavy equipment. Let's see what happens next. The Russians have dropped off some infantry and continue on their way, with a tank going in first. Another Ivan. This one went out to gather wood for the fire. This is the kind of attack Ukraine regularly goes on. Here, the Ukrainians were tasked with knocking out the Russians who had occupied the destroyed bridge. An armored personnel carrier drops off Ukrainian soldiers. After mopping up, the infantry and armored personnel carriers retreat, and the tank is left to fire a few test shots. Ukrainian artillery strikes next. As a result, the remnants of the Russians hastily leave their positions. A rare and valuable Russian 2S4 Tilpin mortar fell prey to a Ukrainian drone. Do you want to know what happened here in the first place? This is a Ukrainian T-72 and an American Max Pro. We can see that the tank ran over an armored vehicle. I found a video of this situation in Russian Telegram channels. It seems to me that the American Max Pro was hit by the Russians, and the Ukrainian tank was kind of pushing it out, covering it with its own armor. At this point, the Russians hit the Ukrainian tank, but it continued to move. At some point, the tank came in from above, probably sat on the bottom and could not get back out. Interesting situation. Another powerful blow to the Russian supply. The video shows the Russian refuelers. The first hit causes one of the vehicles to catch fire. This time, the Russians decided to attack one of the Ukrainian positions with tanks. Payback was not long in coming. An FPV drone takes to the sky and chases the Russian tanks. After a moment, the drone dives and hits the exact target. 5 accurate hits. The armor of the armored personnel carrier doesn't hold up. The vehicle is incinerated. And this is how the Russians lost the T-90M tank. The minimum cost of such a tank is $4.5 million. The Russian BMP got stuck. The crew abandoned the vehicle. The Ukrainians could not get past it. A thermobaric grenade is thrown precisely into the open hatch of the armored personnel carrier. The Russian garbage is destroyed. Who could have guessed that some of the equipment would now be destroyed by drone bombers by accurately tossing grenades into the hatch of the vehicle? Russian tanks have strong frontal armor, and that's it. In other places, for the current means of fighting them, it is simply not there. If there are enough shells, the tank turns into shrapnel. A Ukrainian drone throws a grenade into the open hatch of a Russian tank. After the explosion, a heavy fire starts. The tank is destroyed. 15 minutes later, a second drone arrives and watches the Russian armored vehicle catch on fire. Most likely, the ammunition was detonated. The turret was torn off. It is lying right next to it. In this case, the very thing that I'm talking about happened. The drone penetrated the armor and hit the ammunition. The tank was instantly torn apart. Anti-tank mines, precision artillery, ATGMs, kamikaze drones, and drone bombers. All of these weapons exploit the vulnerabilities of armored vehicles and effectively counter them. In this video, the Ukrainians use a Polish AHS Crab howitzer to accurately destroy a Russian Tilpin heavy mortar. This is a rare and valuable mortar, capable of destroying very serious fortifications. a Ukrainian drone detects the Russians in the rubble. The Russians notice it too and open fire. The coordinates of this location have already been given to Ukrainian artillery. A precise hit forces the Russians to hide in burrows. The Russian Akatsiya self-propelled artillery unit made a beautiful bada-boom. 3 tanks are taking the military to the forest belt. The video shows Ukrainian artillery trying to prevent this. One of the shells bursts near the tank and immobilizes it. The drone returns after replacing the battery. Both tanks have already left the battlefield, leaving the hit Russian tank behind. There is a powerful explosion. The tank is torn apart. The turret is thrown into the air. What does this hit look like? That's right. Another defeat of Russian equipment by American HIMARS. The Tor-2M SAM is destroyed. HIMARS became a weapon that helped turn the tide of the war. Now, these MLRSs are doing a lot of damage to the Russian army on a daily basis. In this video, the Russians are acting like ISIS terrorists. They filled a T-54 tank with 6 tons of TNT and directed it toward Ukrainian positions. The tank didn't make it about 100 meters before it exploded on a mine. The Ukrainians fired an RPG at the stopped tank, which caused the explosives to detonate. And these dramatic events for the Russians take place near the Crimea forests. Ukrainian aerial reconnaissance detects a cluster of Russian soldiers. A drone transmits the exact coordinates to the spotters. Several accurate hits hit the area with the Russians. The Russians realized that they were trapped. On November 11th, they retreated from Kherson, blowing up the bridge. If a bridge, railroad, or highway supplying the Russian army is within range of these systems, the Ukrainians strike them. Because of the high effectiveness of HIMARS, the Russians began to place their depots, command posts, repair bases, and other logistics further away from the front. The Ukrainians did an ingenious thing. Today, I'm going to show you how these systems are burning out Russian troops in Ukraine. These weapons broke all of the Russians' plans. How and why did that happen? Let's get to the bottom of it. Here's what the warehouse looks like the day after the hit. And such strikes have become systemic. They are still being repeated. With only 10 HIMARS installations, this has allowed the Ukrainians to launch dozens of strikes against the Russians every 24 hours. All indications are that the Americans have already transferred GLSDB bombs to the Ukrainians. They are launched from HIMARS and fly 150 kilometers, perfect for destroying buildings. Take a look at this video. As the Ukrainians claim, this is how you use a GLSDB bomb. This is the explosion of one of the ammunition depots. The Russians thought they had a secure rear and were safe. Within a month, the Ukrainians destroyed dozens of large depots. And this went on for months, which weakened the Russian artillery. Armor turns into a mesh, shrapnel easily penetrating body armor, and helmets. No matter how much the Russians tried to protect their artillery, even partially burying it, it doesn't help. On June 24th, this video appears online. It shows Ukrainians using HIMARS against Russians for the first time. Here's another one, all thanks to the reconnaissance advantage and high mobility of HIMARS complexes. And this is the Tornado MLRS, a rare, valuable, and deadly machine. One shot and the Russians don't stand a chance. If you watch this video in slow motion, you can see how the HIMARS missile hits the target. Ukrainians have detected a complex of electronic warfare, Svet-KU. The HIMARS received the coordinates. A fragmentation shell perforated the Russian complex. Wonderful! The crew of this tank never realized the grills will not help, but only hinder. A drone strikes a Russian T-80. The armor of the tank cannot withstand, and the grates do not save. The shells catch fire, destroying the tank. What's that trough? The unloading of shells has been stopped. Guys, get out! Another suicidal attempt. There are plenty of mines stacked up ahead. It's all over, pretty obviously. Another Russian monster. A truck with an S-60 cannon. Nice hit. It's almost beautiful. A kamikaze drone chases a Russian tank with a brazier. The operator aims the drone at the engine and disables the tank. Superb. And this is what happens when you bring this kind of equipment to the front. The UR-77 becomes easy prey for a strike drone. How epic they always blow up. This is the radar station. It's damaged, and the fuel tanker is leaking fuel. And in this footage, the launcher and loader are completely destroyed. Nice operation. This bada boom most of you have already seen. The Ukrainians have detected a Russian Grad MLRS. The decision has been made to hit them with brass knuckle ammunition. Disguise it or don't disguise it. It won't work. Boom! We got a hit. Another video from the category Genocide of Buchanoks in Ukraine. It burns beautifully. What about attack drones? We should not forget their contribution to the fight against Russian terrorism. And another victim. The Masta B howitzer does not survive an encounter with an American monster shrapnel shell. The Russians hid their tank in a wooded area, apparently not good enough. The drone corrected the artillery and helped destroy this pan. And in this video, we have a hygiene vehicle. But why do the Russians need it? It's not for no reason that they're called dirty asses in Ukraine. The junk is destroyed. Another failure. The AFV miraculously manages to escape and is not destroyed. The fate of the tank was much sadder. It hit a mine and burst into flames. And this is all that's left of it. This is how hitting a tank looks like through the eyes of a Russian soldier. Another Russian tank falls into a Ukrainian trap and loses its tracks. After dropping a grenade, a fire occurs. The drone flies to a safe distance and watches the tank burn. The Stugna P anti-tank missile continues to destroy Russian tanks. The explosion scatters the parts of the tank in different directions. The Ukrainians discover a Russian howitzer. Artillery receives coordinates. Nearby, the Russians have placed an ammunition depot. A big mistake. One hit on the building, and not only the warehouse will be destroyed, but also the delivery trucks, howitzer crews, and the gun itself. The first hits into the howitzer, the second into the building. And these Russian soldiers in armored personnel carriers are ambushed by Ukrainians with ATGMs. The first APC rushes to a combat mission. It is overtaken by a Ukrainian missile. 2 more APCs follow. Perhaps they are on their way to evacuation. The second APC becomes another easy target for the Ukrainian armed forces. After being hit, the armored vehicle catches fire, which led to a powerful explosion. What happened to the third vehicle is unknown. This is how $20 million turns into scrap metal. This is the Panzer S-1. Its mission is to fight Ukrainian air targets near Bakhmut. The Russians decide to move the complex closer to the forest. A hit by artillery causes the machine to catch fire. Later, a detonation occurs. Every day, Javelin and NLAW missiles help stop Russian convoys of tanks and armored personnel carriers. A Javelin missile hits a Russian tank. The armored personnel carrier turns around and goes to the tank. Time to evacuate the grieving soldiers and get them out of the battlefield. The assault fails. And this is the destruction of abandoned Russian BMPs. A drone drops a thermobaric grenade and hits an open hatch.
The turret flies high in the sky 15 to 20 meters. Falling from this height, it pierces the asphalt like this. At this place, a rocket hit the Russian tank. The hole was half a meter deep. The engine was thrown into the woods. Look how far the turret flew and hit the ground. Parts were scattered all over the place. The NLAW has a high armor penetration rate. This is the Russian T-80 tank. The NLAW pierced right through it. This is where the missile hit. It punched through the armor, the batteries, the fuel tank, and out on the other side. The first time I saw it, I was very impressed. The Javelin missile is capable of hitting targets up to 2.5 kilometers away. According to some information, the Javelin is capable of hitting targets at a distance of more than 4,000 meters. This is a Russian tank. The Ukrainians are firing a Javelin missile. The missile comes from above. Do you think after such a hit the tank is usable? Lucky if it can make it to some shelter. The tank is on fire, the driver cannot handle it. It's time to evacuate and run. A Russian tank rides to support his group. In order to assess the situation, it stops. This is the first mistake. The military claims that the Javelin missile is even capable of shooting down a helicopter. The third tank is trying to escape. But we know there's no hiding from the Javelin, especially in the field. The tank withstands the hit, though pieces are torn off of it. The Ukrainians are also using another ATGMs to destroy Russian armored vehicles. A soldier comes out of cover and fires at a tank with an ATGM. Surprisingly, the second tank did nothing when it saw the Ukrainian. The rocket strikes the engine compartment. The tank is damaged. The second hit went straight into the turret. This is all that is left of the tank. A Russian tank has taken up a position near one of Ukraine's coal enterprises. Reconnaissance has detected it. Ukrainians set up Studna missile defense system to work. The missile has been fired. It has laser guidance and follows into a laser illuminated object. After a hit, the tank catches fire. It is destroyed. The Ukrainian saboteurs armored with NLAW complexes set out on a mission. The soldier fires the first shot, hitting a Russian armored personnel carrier. The second one is dealt with by artillery. The mission is completed.
If the Javelin is a shoot and forget type system, i.e. the missile itself will reach and hit the target, then the Russians have to sit there and shine a laser at the target, which reduces its effectiveness, accuracy, and puts the soldiers at risk. Yes, the Russians have made this ATGM as versatile as possible in multiple modifications, and mount it on almost anything they can. Because of the advantage in numbers, they managed to show some results. By the way, the Ukrainians have captured many trophy cornets when the Russians were fleeing from the Kherson and Kharkiv regions. There are even videos of their successful use against the Russians. And this is the use of the missile in direct attack mode. It is selected when the target is in the open terrain and nothing prevents it from being hit. This video shows Ukrainians watching the Cornet missile through a Stugna screen. The tank is destroyed. Here's yet another example. This tank is partially protected by trees, or rather what is left of them. But for the Javelin missile, it's not an obstacle. It attacks from the sky. There are some more videos of Ukrainians destroying Russian infantry using Trophy Cornet, but because of YouTube rules, I can't show these on my channel. The Ukrainian analog is the Stugna P ATGM. It does not differ in principle from the Russian Cornet, and is not inferior to it in terms of effectiveness and performance. It was the Stugna that allowed the Ukrainians to compensate for the insufficient number of Javelin on the front. There are dozens of videos of Russian tanks and other armored vehicles being destroyed by this complex.
Yes!
Here's how it looks in practice. The Ukrainians fire a missile and aim it at a target using a laser. If the target is immobilized, there are no problems. Or take this video. The Russian helicopter was flying at extremely low altitude, so that the Ukrainians couldn't shoot it down with air defense systems. And it's true, it's extremely difficult to shoot down such a target. But not for the Javelin. Nice hit. The second missile goes into the BMP that's following the tank. Ba-boom! Stops it in its place in the same spot where the tank was hit moments earlier. The Russians hid 2 armored personnel carriers in these garages. The Ukrainian attack drone returns at night. A series of accurate throws leaves no chance and turns the equipment into junk. This is the result that we observe the next morning. 2 armored personnel carriers destroyed. Well done. But don't think that Ukrainians have only one such trophy complex. Here is another video of Soint-Sepyok striking Russian troops and equipment. Often, a hit from a Javelin or NLAW does not instantly detonate the tank, but causes an internal fire. Ammunition then heats up and explodes. This is how the Bradley-based TOW ATGM destroys a Russian armored personnel carrier with a precise hit. Nicely done. The Russians are trying their best to protect their tanks by welding these structures onto them, but it's not working well. An FPV drone dives into the engine compartment and sets the tank on fire. When the fire reaches the electronics or ammunition, the tank is destroyed. And in this video, 3 Grad MLRSs are turned into junk all at once. First, the Ukrainians discover one of the installations in the field. These Russian losers did something really stupid. They came to a place where they had just been defeated by Ukrainian artillery. Did they not learn their lesson the first time? And this is the precise work of Ukrainian artillery on a Russian tank. The crew of the tank is fleeing, leaving the immobilized vehicle behind. A few grenades into the open hatches, and the tank is destroyed. Aerial reconnaissance detects 2 more complexes in one place at once. 1 missile is enough to destroy 2 targets. Nice work. Another Grad. And this is a reconnaissance battle of a group of Ukrainian tanks. One of them runs over a mine and an explosion occurs. The Ukrainians stop to evacuate the crew of the hit tank. Fortunately, we see the entire crew leave the tank. They were saved. This Russian tank stopped in the field. A grave mistake. The Ukrainians point the Stugna ATGM and fire a missile. This is all that is left of it. Russian paratroopers have arrived at their positions. A Ukrainian drone with explosives is already on guard. Ukrainians detect a Russian tank. An FPV drone is launched. The first hit is to immobilize the Russian tank. After the second hit, the tank is most likely destroyed. But the Ukrainians decide to reassure themselves. The Ukrainians detect the MTLB and launch a drone with explosives. A single hit may be enough to take this armored vehicle out of action and later take it as a trophy or destroy it. And this Russian tank maneuvers to avoid artillery hits. Do you think he can do it? Let's find out. A devastating hit. The Russian tank is destroyed. Ukrainians organized an ambush near one of the roads. A tank and a truck drive along the road. The Stugna rocket is already chasing the Russian tank. The target is eliminated. This human-guided flying munition can have a range of up to 10 kilometers. Now here's a real example right in front of you. The TOS-1A Soit Sepyok is a formidable and effective weapon with many disadvantages. The first is weak defense. The second is low range. Its cost? $15 million. The cost of a drone is between $300 and $1,000, depending on the explosives. The war of the future is heating up in Ukraine. The military has adapted FPV drones and turned them into deadly weapons. How much more expensive do you think this complex was than the drone that destroyed it? And this video perfectly demonstrates the fight of such drones against fortified and equipped positions. An anti-tank system, an automatic grenade launcher, and a large caliber machine gun. The first target is a machine gun. The second is an anti-tank missile system. Third, grenade launcher. Nice work. The Ukrainians send an FPV drone with a small explosive, enough to destroy the tank if it gets inside. The Ukrainian drone dives into the open hatch and explodes. We see smoke and flames. The tank is lost. And these guys were coming back from the front lines. A Ukrainian drone catches up with them. In a moment, we watch as Russian equipment turns to charcoal. There are dozens of strikes like this every day. I'm showing you a very small fraction of what I see. Now, the Ukrainian military does not need to leave their positions and hunt for Russian equipment. The Ukrainians are using RPG-7-shaped charge grenades against armored turrets. Its armor penetration is 500 millimeters. This probably reduces their penetration characteristics a bit, but from what we can see, it's enough. The Ukrainians are also using drones to strike at Russian logistics. Another serious loss for Russia recently is the Solntsepyok heavy flamethrower system. As practice has shown, ineffective weapons touted by the Russian army. The Russians decided to counterattack to slow down the Ukrainian offensive. It turned out badly. Let's take a look at it. A Russian military column rushes across the field. The Russians fall into a trap. There is a minefield ahead. A tank tries to skip and explodes. Stopping under artillery fire is deadly. Minefields play a very important role in any war. They make it possible to stop advancing enemy equipment. and mines are a lot cheaper than any equipment destroyed with them. And this is what happens to abandoned Russian tanks in places where Ukrainians can't take them as trophies. Another Russian BMP. Apparently, the armored personnel carrier was hit by ATGMs or exploded on mines. The drone goes to replace the battery, and when it returns, it discovers this. And this is the shameful flight of the Russian army after they were defeated by Ukrainian troops. A lot of damaged Russian equipment and dozens of fleeing soldiers are caught in the frame. This video shows the destruction of a Russian military column by Ukrainian artillery. More than 20 units of various Russian equipment came under fire. This is how, for example, one of the trucks filled with ammunition exploded. Strangely, we don't even see any attempts to move the vehicles away. Moving on, it's time for you guys to go home. The kamikaze drone penetrates the armor and sets the tank on fire. You can see that when the second drone arrives to assess the situation. I would call this place Death's Crossroads. If you follow the events, you'll definitely recognize this place. A drone takes out an abandoned Russian tank. Way to go! Those bunny boys got what they deserved. A drone crashes into the roof of a car and explodes. Do you think these Russians have gotten good? You all know this freak, don't you? Bukhanka is the pride of the Soviet automobile industry. Ukrainians continue to destroy this old Soviet junk. Now that is where the Russians have stacked fuel, ammo, and more ammo. The drone hits the target, mission accomplished. Good job. A Russian mortar was hidden under this camouflage net. The Russians are hiding an anti-aircraft launcher. It might have worked if the Ukrainians hadn't followed them. An FPV drone destroys a Russian firing point. The Russians had set up a machine gun point in this building and were obstructing the advance. A Ukrainian kamikaze drone has remedied the situation. Now, there is one less threat in the way of Ukrainian infantrymen. And this is the elimination of a rare 203mm self-propelled artillery peon. Boom! What's up? A Grad MLRS hits the UAV's lens. Russians, pack your bags. Target has been eliminated. Hey Russians, this is a message for you. 1. Don't leave your fire unattended. 2. Don't smoke in the interior of the BMP-2. 3. Don't throw cigarette butts on the side of the road. And 4. Don't mess around with pyrotechnics. And in general, don't start a war with Ukraine. Here's a funny situation. Russians on a BMP thought to escape from pursuit of a Ukrainian kamikaze drone. 1-0 in favor of the Ukrainians. And this is the fight against the logistics of Russian terrorists. A massive explosion of a field depot with ammunition. One grenade was enough to deprive the Russians of a week's supply of ammunition. And just like that, another Russian ammunition and fuel depot exploded beautifully. The drone watches on as the flames destroy the remnants of the Russian world. A Buck M3 SAM system, with a price tag of more than $40 million. Kaboom! Goodbye! A very large number of Russian vehicles have been destroyed by FPV kamikaze drones. Let's take a look at the most interesting and exciting ones. More Russian grief-stricken paratroopers. An FPV drone crashes into an armored personnel carrier. I can't show you what happened next, but believe me, the Russian soldiers got it bad. Another abandoned armored personnel carrier. The Ukrainians fill it with explosives and blow it up. The armored vehicle is no more. The Russians have driven 3 of their Masta B howitzers into firing positions. No problem. With targeted shots, the Ukrainians destroy each of them. Is this a consequence of the failed counterattack in the forests of Crimea? The 2 APCs are becoming an excellent target for the Ukrainian Armed Forces artillery. A drone dives into the front of an armored personnel carrier. Now this Russian junk is ready to be scrapped. HIMARS destroyed 4 Masta S SPHs. The Ukrainians spent 1 shell on each Russian artillery piece. Fast, accurate, and effective. At this rate, the Russian army will soon go deaf and blind in Ukraine. This is how the Zettel electronic warfare was destroyed. Where are you guys going? An FPV drone catches up with a Russian tank. It manages to damage the engine. The crew is forced to abandon the tank and flee. An anti-aircraft launcher on a truck chassis. The kamikaze drone is on target. We've got a hit. The SAM is destroyed. And this is how the counterattack of the Russian armored group ended. 3 tanks and 3 AFVs are trying to get behind the Ukrainians. Aerial reconnaissance detects them in time. The Ukrainian artillery begins to make heavy blows to the terrorists. One of the shells exactly hits a tank. The result? 2 tanks and 1 AFV were destroyed. The other equipment manages to escape. The assault was a failure. In general, Russian tanks are continuing to delight us with such footage. They continue to burn, shooting 5-meter columns of fire or explosions, tossing the turret dozens of meters into the sky. And here, they were storing ammunition for a week of combat operations. The bottom line is that the Russians have nothing to fight with near Ugledar. Next video. 3 Hyacinth S units form a battery. The Ukrainians point artillery and fire a salvo. The second hit sets one of the units on fire. There is a powerful explosion. It is visible even from the Ukrainian positions. The explosion sets fire to a neighboring artillery unit. This is an example of professional counter-battery fighting. And this is the large-caliber 2C4 Tulpin howitzer. The 240mm gun easily destroys buildings and fortifications, which makes the howitzer priceless and in short supply. But the Russians are fighting as if they have thousands more of these mortars in stock. This is what another unsuccessful attempt by Russian tanks to break through in the Donetsk region looks like. After another hit on the tank, it bursts into flames like a match. And this Russian MLRS made a beautiful boom. The drone detects the installation. It appears to be abandoned. The first bomb misses. The second falls directly on the ammunition rails and causes the shells to explode instantly. And these Russians got lost and drove down a mined road. After the explosion, the crew left the tank. The Ukrainians launch an ATGM and finish it off. And this is the exact work of FPV drone operators. The first drone brings down an armored personnel carrier.
Now you're witnessing a direct hit on a tank. Ammunition instantly ignites. The fire is so strong that 5-meter columns of fire burst out of the tank. That's definitely a bad sign. Most likely there will be an explosion. The turret of the tank is sent to flight. The main feature is the low weight and a large choice of charges, all depending on the targets to be fired at. For tanks it is 1 charge, for shelters another, and so on. It is difficult to hide from the missile even behind obstacles. The missile often hits the target from above, where the most vulnerable armor is. A Ukrainian hit a Russian BMP with an RPG. 1 precise hit was enough to penetrate the armor of the vehicle. Of course, nothing has been able to match the effectiveness of the Javelin yet. 2 more armored personnel carriers pull out, probably to evacuate these soldiers. The first armored vehicle hits a mine and stops. Nearby stands a tank that's been hit with a Javelin. Take a look at this recent video of an epic detonation. 3 Russian tanks attacked Ukrainian positions. The first Javelin shot beautifully destroys the first tank. This Russian tank was lucky it was not destroyed by the first Javelin hit. After the tank was hit, it was able to leave the combat position. The tank tries to avoid the place where the mine exploded earlier, but it runs into another mine. It tries to turn around and fails again. Let's see how the FGM-148 Javelin anti-tank missile system handles Russian armor. Often tanks and armor personnel carriers set off epic fireworks. This happens because of the outdated design of Russian vehicles and the new principle of operation of the ATGMs. The Javelin has become the undisputed favorite and the most dangerous ATGM for Russian armored vehicles. The NLAW is also quite popular in Ukraine and has proven itself well. Its main difference from the Javelin is its low weight and higher rate of preparation for firing.
My friends who destroy Russian terrorists have told me of cases where the Russians tried to suppress the Javelin missile with electronic jamming equipment, and it didn't work. The American system is so ingeniously designed and thought out that it has a means of defense against electronic jamming. What can the Russians do to counter this complex? And do the Ukrainians have anything that can compare with it in terms of effectiveness? The Russian analog of the Javelin is the Kornet ATGM, but it loses to the American system in almost all respects. Its weight is 3 times more, there is no homing system, it has to be illuminated by a laser during the entire missile flight. Another tank. This time, the Kornet hit a T-90M Proryev. A little bit later, the Ukrainians finished the tank using a drone. Remember this video? This is where the Javelin ATM began its triumphant journey. More than a year has passed, and the Russians have not been able to reduce the effectiveness of the system. And this video is from the realm of fantasy. The Ukrainians identified a group of terrorists with Kornet ATGMs and fired a Stugna at them.
Есть.
The complex can be used to defeat low-flying attack helicopters. This Russian tank was destroyed at a fairly close range. The Ukrainians took a very advantageous position, waited for the Russian armor to approach, and hit it. It only takes 50 meters for the missile to activate and hit the target. But if you imagine a helicopter flying at an altitude of more than 4,000 meters, that won't stop the Javelin missile. The missile's maximum altitude is 4,200 meters. And this is an extremely rare and unique case. A Russian helicopter has come to land paratroopers, for which it needs to hover in the air for some time. The Ukrainians use a Stugna and launch a missile. The Russian helicopter is destroyed. And this is the MSTA SSPH. HIMARS calculation sends several missiles and destroys it. The high accuracy of Western artillery allows it to hit rare and valuable Russian SPHs with a single shot. The Ukrainians continue to beat the Russians with their own weapons. A Javelin missile burns through the armor where the ammunition is located. The powerful explosion tears the tank into thousands of small pieces. The Stugna ATGM has inflicted serious damage on the Russians this week. First, the Ukrainians fire a missile at the Russian pickup truck carrying ammunition and destroy it. A little later, Ukrainian missileers find an MTLB and use another missile to send this Russian junk straight to hell. The loss of each howitzer weakens Russia and saves hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers. A Ukrainian drone discovers an MT-12 anti-tank gun that the Russians tried to hide under some pipes. The drone returns at night and brings back some goodies for the Russians. It hovers in the air, takes aim, and drops the gift. This is the first time I've seen explosives like this. It resembles C4. The drone returns twice with more gifts for the howitzer. Mission accomplished. The gun is destroyed. A large number of Russian vehicles were destroyed with HIMARS. For example, this Zoopark 1M radar. The Ukrainians tracked it down and gave the coordinates to the HIMARS. The unit fires 2 missiles and hits the Russian system. Well done. Aerial reconnaissance detects another sweet target. The Ukrainians point artillery at the target and fire 3 accurate shots. Another Russian howitzer is destroyed. Another FPV drone hit on the tank. After hitting this tank, the Russians try to save it, but they do not succeed well. The tank travels a short distance and stalls. The crew leaves the hit vehicle in a hurry and escapes. And in this situation, the bars didn't save the armored vehicle from the drone. But that's not all. Reconnaissance detects an enemy Hyacinth S. Boom! Mission accomplished. In order to slow down the advance of the Russians or cut off escape routes, Ukrainian sappers often carry out operations like this. They mine a section of road and then blow it up. Sappers plant explosives. Anti-tank mines TM62 are often used for such work. One explosion is not enough. After the second explosion, the Russians will have to use other roads, where the Ukrainians will be waiting for them. Another hit by Ukrainian artillery. This time, the prey is a Russian armored personnel carrier. 2 Russian Ivans are diligently trying to camouflage an ATGM. The Ukrainian operator waits for the Russians to finish and leave the complex. The Russians leave. The drone returns with explosives. A few grenades, and the ATGM is destroyed. And this is the outskirts of Donetsk. A Russian tank burns down beautifully after being destroyed. I think the question on the minds of the Russians is, how did the Ukrainians manage to destroy it? This Russian Tor Sam made a beautiful bada boom. I don't know what exactly it was hit with, but it was enough to detonate its ammunition. The tank is engulfed in flames. When the temperature becomes critical, there is a powerful explosion. The SBU destroyed at least 4 Russian SAM complexes. These are Tor M1 and Buck 2M. Check this out. The drone strikes the tank in the rear part of the turret, and immediately columns of smoke and fire start bursting out of the tank under high pressure. The Russians are learning quickly, setting up electronic supplies, setting up factories to produce these weapons, and using them on the battlefield. 2 tanks are left on a combat mission. A kamikaze drone first accompanies them and then promptly attacks the first vehicle. But this does not stop the Russians. They start shelling Ukrainian positions. The second drone is on its way. It dives and hits a Russian tank. The flash is really bright. I think this tank is disabled. Everything that I've talked about in this video makes us realize drones are now an integral part of any military operations. They help to destroy enemy vehicles, logistics, various complexes, and infantry. Let's get back to the tanks. They are the main force for offensive and defensive operations. It is tanks that allow you to quickly stop attacks or break through enemy defenses. Because of this, the tank is the #1 target on the battlefield. Therefore, the military greatly appreciates the means to deal with them quickly. Take a look at these examples. Drones are profitable against any target that costs more than $1,000. See this? It's a self-propelled mortar. It has a short range, which is why it falls victim to a kamikaze drone. It's worth hundreds of times more than the cost of the drone. The Russians have installed surveillance equipment on this tall pipe. 1 drone is enough to destroy the complex. In this video, a kamikaze drone destroys a Russian BMP that was transporting ammunition for soldiers. Ukrainians again use drones. The tank's armor cannot withstand, and the ammunition is on fire. It's happening to the armored vehicle as well. Good work. This is an ammunition delivery vehicle right at the positions. After that, the Russian boys got a little down. And this is video of a brutal assault on Russian positions by Ukrainian soldiers. It all starts with the landing of Ukrainian infantry. They are covered by 2 HIMARS. More and more often there are videos with the use of Leopard tanks transferred to Ukraine. By the way, insignia are painted with fluorescent paint to make it easier to distinguish Russian tanks from Ukrainian ones. There is already a video on the net where several such tanks were damaged or destroyed. I can make a video with analysis of why this happened. If you're interested, write about it down in the comments. And this is the exact work of the HIMARS on the Russian MLRS. GMLRS rounds were used to destroy the vehicles. And this is a Russian counterattack in the Zaporizhia region. A T-72 tank goes first, followed by armored personnel carriers with infantry. The artillery fires the first shot that incapacitates the armored personnel carrier. Unfortunately, the drone discharged and did not capture the detonation. There is a small crater at the place where the tank was, and the pieces of the tank were scattered for dozens of meters in the area. FPV drones are very effective. Just watch this video. The drone hits the engine bay area of the tank. The tank manages to travel a short distance, but the damage causes a fire. The tank is destroyed. Another victim! A Russian tank goes on a combat mission. The crew does not know what fate awaits them. The first Ukrainian drone stops the tank, followed by a second drone. There's the penetration. Goodbye, Russian terrorist tankers. This drone drops a grenade and hits the open hatch. What a heartwarming video of a terrorist tank on fire. The Ukrainians have discovered a Russian ammunition depot. Note that the Russians know they are being followed by a drone, but do nothing about it. It's kamikaze drone time. The operator guides it precisely into the ammunition building. High temperatures do the trick. The warehouse is destroyed. Bravo! Kakhovka Dam. The Russians put a radar system in the building. It's a special system for fighting drones. As you can see, the fight failed. Video of a real hunt for Russian reconnaissance drone operators. First, the Ukrainians discover where the Russians are stationed. Why did the Russians leave the drone on the street? A great gift to the Ukrainians. An FPV drone is many times cheaper than the target it destroyed. Friends, I show you all of these videos not to entertain you, but to show you the horror of war. Every day, hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers die in Ukraine, men and women giving their lives for the freedom and security of their country. Let us remember this. Hey Russians, aren't you fed up yet? Another grad is going into the furnace of war. Let's see how the Shark UAV corrects HIMARS strikes. The first and second targets are Masta B howitzers. A failed terrorist assault. There's a T-90 hidden in these bushes. Ukrainians use a kamikaze drone to finish off a Russian tank. Isn't that enough for you? Alright, it's time to load the cluster munitions. Russian grieving soldiers, now you will feel the Ukrainian fury. Blow after blow, the ammunition starts raining down on the Russians' heads. In the end, do you think there are any survivors? This truck is carrying shells and towing a Russian howitzer at the same time. It's time to put a stop to this. Boom! We got a hit. Truck and howitzer destroyed. Ukrainian air reconnaissance detects a Russian T-90M tank. There were less than 100 such tanks in the Russian arsenal before the war with Ukraine began. Ukrainian artillery fires several shots. The Russians are frightened and turn their vehicles around in time to escape. A few shots were enough to disrupt the advance. Where has all of the Russian boldness gone? This Russian tank will never disturb Ukrainians ever again. The distance does not exceed more than 20 meters. After the tank completes its mission, the armored personnel carriers bring in the Ukrainian infantry. It's time to clean up the Russian positions. The surviving Russians decide to escape. Mission accomplished. We can go back. One of the Russians runs out to wash his eyes. A Ukrainian throws a grenade in his direction. There are Russians on the opposite side as well. They have come out of hiding. The drone operator reports this to the Ukrainian soldiers. It was a deplorable mistake for the Russian. Several shots from an assault rifle and one from an RPG. The Ukrainians do not succeed in knocking out the Russians. The Russians ignore the offer to surrender. The second mistake.
Давай танк сюда.
An accurate grenade drop into the orc's lair. The drone operator demonstrates skill and luck. Marinka. Fighting for this settlement has not stopped since the beginning of the war. The video shows a Ukrainian tank firing at a Russian fortification. When the work of the tank is completed, a group of Ukrainian assault troops moves in. They apply demining systems. Another senseless loss of a tank by the Russians. This time, a Ukrainian FPV drone destroys a tank with a precise hit. The data is transmitted to the artillery. A hit near the building causes the warehouse to catch fire. Mission accomplished. The Ukrainians throw smoke bombs and get closer to the Russians. The assault has begun. When the temperature becomes critical, there is a powerful explosion. Flying fuel tanker parts damage the neighboring vehicle, which leads to another explosion. The result, the fuel trucks are destroyed or critically damaged. And this is the Russian T-80 and its last stop in Ukraine. Beautiful burnout of the ammunition.